When I was diagnosed, they said, you have a terminal diagnosis.
But I had 2 years to live.
There's new treatments becoming available, but don't expect miracles.
After that moment, I can't remember anything else.
They said I'd have to take 2 tablets a day, but I'd be okay.
I've been living with this disease since October 1982. They were calling it a gay plague, you know, that we had brought it on ourselves. I mean, that is a death sentence.
But for me to have my gender reassignment operation, it was compulsory to have an AIDS test. I had lost my career over my gender issues, and all of a sudden, I was not going to have my operation because there was nobody operating on anybody that had AIDS.
I'd seen too many of my friends become sick, and many of them had died.
This was actually a time where you're going for the test and you come back a week later for the results. I was so ashamed of myself because I had access to information about HIV. You know, I volunteered as a sexual health assistant with a local charity, GMFA at the time, and no one is actually immune. The fact that I had a knowledge on prevention didn't actually stop the infection itself.
It was the equivalent of being told you had Ebola.
I thought that was the end, and that was down to stigmas that I held within me, and did my research, and here I am.
And so the side effects were awful. It's amazing to see how far we've come. I can have a normal life expectancy.
I think that people are they still have that information that was peddled back in those early days. I think the big thing that hasn't changed is the stigma.
When people look at me, I always felt that they can see the HIV.
I would hear people referring to me as the AIDS-ridden bitch.
HIV is still considered a disease that is out of sin.
Hasn't shifted very much at all.
So I've experienced discrimination in tattoo studios and piercing parlors.
You know, so there's all of that misinformation is out there, and that's why it's so important to make sure people are educated.
In the first 5 years of my diagnosis, I went from being a top model, agent, hair and makeup artist to being a heroin addict, a crack addict, a prostitute, and literally working on the streets of Soho. The more I went on and off medication, I was building a resistance to the meds. I just thought to myself, if I get undetectable again, then I am going to come out of the shadows and I am going to talk about my HIV.
The most important thing that has changed has been this fact that if you are on effective medication and your viral load is undetectable, you cannot pass it on.
Actually, it does a huge amount to chip away at that stigma. It makes people realise that HIV is something that, yes, is a serious medical condition, but can be treated well.
I think it's important that public figures, speak out about their HIV status. I was pleasantly joyful when I, heard about Gareth Thomas coming out. Gareth Thomas coming out with his HIV status, and indeed every young person or anyone newly diagnosed with HIV see the celebrities. And I think it's also important because we live in a world where we look up to celebrities and heroes out there.
I'd have to thank him and thank him for coming forward in a time where it wasn't easy for him to come forward, to keep doing what he's doing, to come out of the other side of his experience and be a profound activist, changing the scene, moves the HIV field away from that agenda, which is where I think it sits quite a lot of the time.
Where people feel more confident about telling their story, about shattering the stigma of HIV. That happened with gay rights. I hope that now we're at a position where that will happen with HIV.